QSO Today, episode 420, Tim Berry, WB4GBI. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest amateur radios and accessories for your ham radio station, and by Nuts and Bolts magazine. Just a reminder that we have a leaderboard that updates in real time on our show notes page, recognizing the generous support that we get from listeners. Our sponsors and listeners make it possible to bring you QSO Today every week. The QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo is still in on-demand mode until October 16th. This means that if you miss the Expo weekend, you can still go back and view the presentations that were made at the Expo and the questions and answers that followed. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4 Zulu 1 Uniform Golf, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. The Jewish holiday of Sukkot, also known as the Festival of Booths, where Jews build Sukkot to live in during the week-long festival, Scott Rosenfeld, N7JI, sent me a message with a suggestion that we should have an activity called Sukkahs on the Air, or Sukkota, similar to the parks on the air during the week of the holiday. Participating in this event is easy. Jews have a mitzvah, or a commandment, to entertain guests in their sukkah during the holiday from the evening of October 9th to October 16th, 2022. So here's how you do it. Find a Jew with a sukkah. Ask if you can bring amateur radio to their sukkah, preferably between meals. Make 3 contacts, complete the Sukkota form, and upload a picture of you operating in the sukkah. I built a website called Sukkahs on the Air at Sukkota, Sukkota.com. Scott and I see this as a win-win situation for everyone involved, especially as it exposes ham radio to communities that might not know about our amazing hobby. We hope that this will evolve into an annual event. See the banner on this week's show notes page. On the final Sunday of the Dayton Hamvention last May, I was wandering around the Xenia Fairground and needed to rest my feet. My guest this week was sitting at a table and was kind enough to let me join him. We struck up a conversation that ultimately led to this interview. Tim Berry, WB4GBI, has been a ham almost 50 years in Knoxville, Tennessee, and has more than a passing interest in repeaters, emergency communications, and has been a broadcast engineer in the area for most of his life. Tim shares his ham radio story in this QSO Today. WB4GBI, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Tim?
Good afternoon. I'm right here.
Tim, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, no one in my family had any history of ham radio. It was, to me, just a childhood fascination with radios. The very first radio that I came in contact with was actually a commercial two-way radio that belonged to my father. My father was in the family funeral business, and then during the 1960s, the funeral homes actually operated the ambulance services in East Tennessee. So, here's this box in my father's car. It fascinated me. I would go down in the evening hours after my father came home from work and turn this radio on and listen. But it being a tube-type radio, quickly ran his battery down in his vehicle, and I got in trouble more than once for that. But my father, seeing this interest, took me to the residence of a ham radio operator, Haven Hood, W4RRS, and I met him at probably about 10 or 11 years old, if I remember correctly. What was interesting about this was my father and his father were fast friends. I became fast friends with Mr. Hood, who lived about maybe 10 minutes away from me. And in the meantime, also befriended a gentleman who was a broadcast engineer who was on the air as an air personality in the evening hours of WLIL radio in Lenore City, and his name was Alan Brazil, W4FYQ. And those two gentlemen kind of helped me channel that interest into amateur radio and fostered me along the way.
Haven Hood, was his father also a ham?
No, sir, he was not. It was interesting about that. He was not, but his first amateur radio license was issued back before the Federal Communications Commission started issuing amateur call signs as we know it. His initial call sign was the FCC district number before we had W's or K's. So his initial call sign was 5HH, believe it or not. Yes.
If we go back in ham radio history, I think the U.S. Department of Navy, after World War I, took over amateur radio licensing, up until the Communications Act in 1934?
Of 1934, yes.
So up until that time, there really wasn't an FCC.
That's true.
So Haven actually was quite a lot older than you were.
Correct. Yeah, he was, at that point, he was probably in his 70s, I assume. Mr. Hood lived to be in his 90s and was around after I passed my license and actually was one of the first people to get on one of my repeaters.
You got your first license at what age?
Age 13.
And what was the call sign?
WN4GBI. I was a novice from September of 1973 until July of 1974. At that time, novice licenses were only good for 2 years, and they did not renew. So you either had to upgrade or give it up. And I managed to upgrade in about 9 months and went to general.
Well, it seems to me, Tim, that you and I got our licenses at, I think, the same month.
Really?
I got my novice license in 1973, just about that time.
Well, believe it or not, my novice license was issued on September the 11th, 1973, a long time before 9/11 had, unfortunately, some other significance.
And you upgraded to what class, general class?
Upgraded to general class in 1974. I got my advanced class, I want to think it was around 1978 or 79, and then I got my extra class in 1982.
Let me ask you, how important was the novice experience to you as an amateur radio operator?
I was in high school at the time, and of course, having been around Mr. Hood and Alan Brazil and some other ham radio operators and seeing what they were able to do with their higher class licenses, to be able to use single sideband, to be able to get on FM and use the repeaters, because at this time, I know in earlier novice licenses, there was some limited 2-meter privileges, 145 to 147 megahertz, and it was this was before repeaters even became popular. But when I had my novice license, we had CW privileges on 80, 40, 15, and 10. So seeing the capabilities that other amateur radio operators had and what they could do with those capabilities kind of propelled me to hone my CW skills, because at the time you had to have, for general, you had to have 13 words a minute Morse code, and for extra, it was 20 words a minute. So to see that and to hone those skills was kind of the incentive for me to move up.
Now, I noticed on your QRZ picture that there's a Heathkit general coverage radio.
It was a Heathkit GR64. My father actually surprised me with that receiver when I was, oh my goodness, probably 8 or 9 years old. I had a distant uncle by marriage who was Joe Levacy, W4YLA, who lived in Atlanta, and we visited him often. My father and he were close in age, and my father bought this receiver and had it delivered to my Uncle JP, as I called him, and he was in the process of building it when we went down there for a visit. And as it turns out, after he had completed it, and I had helped him somewhat with that, and also helped in its alignment. He said, "Oh, by the way, this is yours." So I got to take it home with me.
That actually probably was the catalyst that got you even more interested in amateur radio. Were you were a shortwave listener at that point?
I was. The receiver had a BFO, which you had to have to receive sideband signals. So listen to that regularly. Listen to shortwave stations like Deutsche Welle, the Voice of Germany, HCJB in Ecuador, which was their call sign stood for Heralding Christ Jesus Blessings. They were a religious station out of Ecuador. So yeah, and somewhere, believe it or not, I still have my SWL log.
How important was amateur radio to the choices that you made for your education and career?
I would say completely important, simply because I knew that I wasn't going into the family business. My father was third generation of funeral directors at a funeral home in Knoxville, Tennessee. I knew I wasn't wanting to do that. I started my college education in business, was going to be a CPA. But after a couple of years of that, I realized I would have been the most miserable CPA on the planet. I had, by that time, acquired my first-class commercial license and decided that I wanted to try to use that. And my first job involving radio was actually when I was 16, tuning up some GE Master Pro low-band transceivers to be converted from the Tennessee Highway Patrol frequencies to Tennessee Emergency Management frequencies, or at that time we called it Civil Defense. And I did that part-time for a local fella in Sevierville, A.T. Henderson, K4EJP. And then my first full-time job in radio was when I was 20. I went to work for the Tennessee Department of Transportation, or as we called it back then, the Highway Department. And they had low-band commercial radios on 47 megahertz and 330-watt low-band base stations on the East Tennessee mountaintops. Worked for them.
How important was George Shaver, K4HXD, to your success in ham radio?
Well, George was my repeater mentor. George and I met when I was 14. I had, by that point, gotten my general class license and was active on the local 2-meter repeaters, one of which was the 146.94 repeater that George owned. And I heard the conversations in reference to they were planning a repeater maintenance trip. And because of that, I asked if I could go. Well, at 14, I obviously couldn't drive. So one of the other hams that were involved in helping George with a repeater was a gentleman named Jerry Purviance, N4SH. And Jerry actually came to my home and picked me up and took me to Chilhowie Mountain, which is where the repeater was located. And there I met George and just was absolutely enthralled with the idea of repeaters and what they did and how they worked and how to work on them. And George and I began a friendship then that really actually culminated when I was working at the same two-way radio shop that he was. That was part of the appeal to go to work for that shop when I was 20, was the fact that George was there. And I built my first repeater at that time with George's tutelage and there at the same shop. And it was GE Progress Line strips, all tube type, had two 6146s as the final and ran a screaming 60 watts. And George helped me put that together, and we put it on the air on a tower site that the company that we both worked for owned just south of downtown Knoxville. And as time passed and George decided that he was going to get out of the repeater business, or at least reduce his involvement in the repeater business, I wound up buying 146.94 in 1985, 147.075, which was our local auto patch repeater, shortly after that, and then his 444.3 repeater after that. So I wound up with all of George's active repeaters, and he was still around and still participating in helping me with them. But it was, to me, it was the highest honor was that he entrusted 14694 to me, because that was the very first repeater that went on the air in East Tennessee in 1967. I listened to it on a multi-band portable radio that my grandfather had even before I had the shortwave receiver, or somewhere around that same time. And because of the fact that George trusted me with that to me was quite an honor. When George decided to sell 9.4 to me, he wanted to sell it. At the time, I was a 20-year-old kid who wasn't thinking about saving money and was spending money just about as fast as I earned it. And when he decided he wanted to sell 9.4, it was for a price that I didn't have saved up in the bank or the ready ability to do it. So I was dating a young lady who I went to her, and she knew I was a ham radio operator and that I was a radio nerd. And I said, she worked at a bank. She was a CSR for the bank. And I said, I'd love to buy this repeater, but I can't afford it. Do you think the bank would give me a loan for this? And she said, no, you don't really have the ham radio repeater is not really collateral for a loan, but I'll loan you the money.
So did you marry that lady?
I married that lady. She is KB4TQO. We celebrate 37 years this year.
And now this message from ICOM America. Heard it, worked it, logged it. This summer, keep your competitive contesting edge with ICOM. Our high-powered base stations cut through pile-ups, letting you work the bands and log those contacts. Contest from the comfort of your home or remotely with the RSBA1 app. The ICOM IC7851 gives you a new window into the RF world, and its on-air excellence is unparalleled. With faster processors, high input gain, high display resolution, and a cleaner signal, it's truly the pinnacle of HF perfection. Features include dual receivers, digital IF filters, memory keyer, digital voice recorder, high-resolution Spectrum waterfall display, enhanced PC connectivity, and an SD memory card slot. The ICOM IC7610 is the SDR every ham wants. This high-performance SDR can pick out faint signals in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio that has changed the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. Its features include RF direct sampling system, 110 dB RMDR, independent dual receiver, and dual digicell. Create your own band openings with the ICOM IC9700. This transceiver brings direct sampling to the UHF-VHF weak signal world. This all-mode transceiver is loaded with innovative features that are sure to keep you busy that include faster processors, higher input gain, higher display resolution, and a cleaner signal. This has become the new de facto standard as a baseband rig for microwave operation as well. Features include 4.3-inch touchscreen color TFT LCD, real-time high-speed spectrum scope and waterfall display, smooth satellite operation with 99 satellite channels, dual watch operation, and full duplex operation in satellite mode. The ICOM IC7300 is a high-performance, innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed expectations. This innovative HF transceiver digitizes RF before various receiver stages, reducing inherent noise in different IF stages. The IC7300 changed the way entry-level HF is designed. It is the go-to rig in my station now, and I love it. Features include RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD memory card slot. Just know that you'll be very pleased with one of these fine rigs to enhance your contest, DX, and general ham radio operation in your station. Be sure to check out these ICOM rigs and their full line of base stations and portable radios at an amateur radio dealer near you. And when you make that purchase of a fine ICOM rig, be sure to tell your dealer that you heard about it here on the QSO Today podcast. And now back to our QSO Today. Now, did you have with the Master Pro, and I'm going into the weeds here for the listeners, did you have the base station power supply for that Master Pro repeater?
No, it was actually, I actually did have the station supplies. It supplied, if I remember correctly, I believe it was 12 volts for the filament, 300 volts for the high voltage. This is going back in the brain fog here, but it was definitely an older power supply, with at least one or two, what we would call B plus voltages, filament voltage. And a changeover relay that if it got dirty or the contacts got pitted, could make some interesting sparks out of it.
It was a beautiful chassis, as I recall. I had one of those early on. The great thing about those strips was they were on a hinge, and they would hinge out, so you could work on both sides of those the GE Master Pro strips. I also had it in my car. It was a great radio too.
It was a great radio, probably the best front end for selectivity of any two-way radio ever made.
And you can't find them anymore.
Yes, that's correct. I actually found 3 at the Dayton Ham Fest this past year.
Did you really?
Yes, I did, and scarfed them up. I use those for monitor receivers. I have several of them with, and for those that are familiar with General Electric, they will remember this. They made a receive-only supply. The transmit and receive power supply, as you referenced, was called a GE EP38 supply. They made a receive-only one that was called an EP39 supply that supplied the 12 volts for the speaker voltage and regulated 10 volts for the other items in the receivers themselves. Since there was no transmitter involved, there didn't have to be any high voltage. So I have several of those with those EP39 supplies and crystals, if anybody remembers crystals, for my repeaters. And those receivers are on the air, or not on the air, they're monitoring the air right now, fed into a multi-channel sound card that record my repeaters for me. So if somebody said, hey, there was a problem on your repeater at such and such a time, I could go back and listen. Or in the event that the repeater was doing something very useful, like providing communications for the Gatlinburg wildfires in 2016, I actually have that whole section of audio where the fellows that were running it was a derivative of the Skywarn net that they were running at the time, and people were coming on the air and asking for assistance. I actually have all of that audio recorded, which is really neat.
You own a lot of repeaters, plus you maintain probably an additional complement of repeaters. Why don't organizations like radio clubs in Knoxville own repeaters?
Well, the truth is they do. The Radio Amateur Club of Knoxville owns 2 on 2 meters, 1 on 6 meters, 1 on 220, 1 on 440. So our local club does. I have helped them in times past, but they have a trustee right now who's very active and does a great job in keeping the club repeaters going. We have a club in Blount County called the Smoky Mountain Amateur Radio Club. They have a 2-meter repeater, a 440 repeater, and they help an individual with his DMR repeater. The Oak Ridge Club has a 2-meter repeater and a 440 repeater. We have a big South Fork Amateur Radio Club that has repeaters. So there's several active clubs around here that have repeaters. There's also several individuals besides myself that have repeaters. So in East Tennessee, I would say that we're blessed with repeaters. With the
repeater rich,
we're repeater rich, and most of them, if not all, are reasonably active. Maybe when one group of repeaters or one repeater is active, maybe the other one is not. But with the activity involving traveling, commuting, morning drive, afternoon drive, as well as nets on the various repeaters at various times, I would say that our repeaters around here are quite active.
Well, I think that seems kind of unusual. Why do you think that is? Does Knoxville and the surrounding area have a lot of hams?
For a physical number, I really couldn't tell you. But I think we have a good proportion of hams. And one of the things that in the last few years those of us who are individuals who've owned repeaters have kind of agreed upon amongst ourselves is that, okay, we find somebody that gets a ham license, and he gets his technician class license, and he gets a 2-meter radio, and he gets on the air. We've all kind of made it our mission, if you will, to try to catch those. I know I do, to try to catch those fellows or ladies when they get on the air the first time. Welcome them to ham radio. Tell them about the repeater that they're on. If there's a website available like mine, give them the website, or give them the website to the local club, or whichever repeater they happen to be on, and encourage them. I think one of the things that happens that is not good for our hobby is that people get their license and they get on the radio and they try to make a contact on the local repeater, and either no one answers them, or they get involved in a QSO where they get ignored. And I, for one, try to not have that happen. If I hear somebody, even at work, if I'm here at work where I am now, and I hear somebody behind me on one of my scanners that gets on and it's a call sign I don't recognize, I'm going to try to get my portable, or I'm going to try to log in remotely to my ham radio at home that I can do from here at work, and make a quick contact with them. How are you today? Tell me about yourself. Welcome to the repeater. This repeater's open. You're welcome to use it. We have a net on this night that I encourage you to check in on. That kind of sort of thing. I think that's important to foster people who just get their amateur radio license and greet them and welcome them and encourage them.
I listened on using All-Star to some of the networks around the world, and I hear people come on for the first time, and they'll always ask for a signal report.
Inevitably, we get a lot of that here, a signal report or a radio check.
A radio check, right. It's kind of like they don't know how to say CQ, and I guess that if they said CQ on some of these networks, they might be, chased off for using the wrong language on the band. Well, I feel for them, because I see that if I don't reply, then somebody else must reply, and if they don't reply, then we've lost that ham. Exactly.
They'll become disinterested because they feel like they've gotten on the air and they've tried to reach out to somebody, and there was nobody to reach out to.
You mentioned having nets on your repeaters. Are you doing a lot of nets, and do nets help keep people actively involved?
In a word, yes. Some of our nets are very specific. For example, our local MCOM group, Meters, the Middle East Tennessee Emergency Radio Service, meets on one of my repeaters that they've kind of adopted as their own. And on Monday nights, we have just a general check-in net at 7 p.m. Eastern on Monday nights. You don't have to be a Meters member. The net control will ask you if you're affiliated with ARES or an emergency service group, but it's basically just a general check-in net. We also have a net on Wednesday nights on the same repeater. That is to practice you guys.
During the COVID pandemic, when the pandemic was raging, did your organizations try to create maybe more nets to make sure that people were actually involved, since they were perhaps locked down at home?
Yes. The Smoky Mountain Amateur Radio Club started a net on their repeaters that was kind of what you might call a health and welfare net, and it still occurs even to this day. And there's also they've also done a Zoom link to it, so that people that might not be able to get to their radio can still participate by hearing the net on a Zoom call. The outgrowth, and I won't necessarily say it was because of COVID, but the outgrowth of us trying to get new hams involved happened with a noon net that we call the Lunch Bunch. It's not on my repeater. It's on a friend's repeater system, Kevin Duplantis, and they have it every day at 12 noon. And new hams are encouraged to check in. There is a net on one of my repeaters on Thursday evenings at 7:30 local time. that's just a general check-in. The net control, Rick, N4JTQ, will greet each one of the check-ins individually, have a little chat with them if it's somebody new. He, of course, will encourage them and thank them for participating and tell them what the net is about. As the net progresses on after all the check-ins have happened, we have 2 or 3 amateur radio operators that do trivia. It could be ham radio related. It could be just general trivia. But we have that for an hour. Everybody's encouraged to participate. And then after the trivia is over, we have what Rick calls a round table. Anybody with a question, anything, topic of discussion. And we'll do that for an hour or so. And that happens weekly on my 145.47 repeater. So I would say that yes, I feel like nets keep the repeaters active. Some are specialized, some are not. But it is because the nets occur at a given regular time, it is a reminder to amateur radio operators in the area that, hey, there's a net on tonight. Or, hey, there's a net on Thursday night, 7:30. Let's check in. Let's participate. I participate in an HF net on 75 meters as often as I can, and have done so for almost in my entire general class and above amateur radio career, which is 40-something years. And it's ingrained in me that, yes, I know the net on 75 meters is going to meet at 6:40 and 7:45 local time in the morning. It's going to meet at 7:30 in the evening. It's going to meet on Saturday and Sunday at 9 in the morning. And by doing that, by that, for lack of a better word, repetition, it encourages people to be there and to participate.
It's become a habit.
Definitely a habit, yes.
I want to take a minute to tell you about my favorite podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast, with George, KJ6VU, and now joined by Rod, VA3ON, Mike, VA3MW, Mark, N6MTS, and Vince, VE6LK. Every 2 weeks, George and company offer up a status report on the many amateur radio projects on their workbenches and explore projects on their guests' workbenches. This group is project active and prolific, covering many technical areas of amateur radio. So the next time you want a deep dive into ham radio electronic project building, or to learn about technology, tools, test equipment, construction techniques, and the rest, listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, available on every podcast player and channel. Use the link in this week's show notes page to get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast directly. And now back to my QSO. Do you think that habit is important in terms of kind of keeping the pulse on the hams? Meaning, if someone doesn't show up, you know they haven't shown up.
When I am net control for the 3980 net that I mentioned, I call the net on Tuesday mornings. If someone's not there from a given county, we call a roll of all the active counties in the state of Tennessee, and if someone's not there, I'll ask, hey, has anybody heard from so and so? Is he okay? And I think the same thing would happen on a local 2-meter net if someone was absent for a while. Yes.
Well, it sounds to me then like Tennessee has kind of mastered the art of creating a community of amateurs, over the years. Would you say that you're a community?
I hope so, and I hope to have had a little part in that. I can't take credit for any more than just the little part that I do personally or that the repeaters do, but I hope that as a whole, the community here of not only other amateur operators but other repeater owners hopefully do the same thing.
I mean, there are other parts of the country where the repeater experience it can be less than pleasant. Do you think that the approach to including everyone that comes upon one of your repeaters is perhaps the reason that you have, it seems to be a more positive experience with owning repeaters?
I certainly hope so. I didn't put my repeaters on the air for them to sit idle. It's seldom, if ever, happened that I've actually witnessed someone on one of my repeaters being rude or harsh to a newcomer. If they did, I I would certainly try to intervene. That's an extreme rarity, so I'm not even going to go there. But I would say that yes, I feel like catching someone when they gets on the air, and so they asked for a radio check, and so that may be something that you feel like is not appropriate. But that if that's their way of reaching out, then hey, your radio's working. You're into my repeater. It's located. Where are you located? Well, once they tell me where they're located, well, the repeater is south of you. It's on this mountaintop. It's an open repeater. Encourage you to use it. Come back and visit with us. By the way, we'll have a net on this repeater on this night. You're welcome to check in. And I just feel like that sort of thing encourages someone who's just gotten their license and yes, most likely their experience or their first experience on amateur radio is going to be one of the 2-meter portable transceivers that can be bought easily. So let's make it a pleasant one. Let's make it where, okay, once I've been on 2 meters and I like this and I've had a good experience, maybe move that to HF. Maybe move it to a digital mode. Maybe move it to participating in a club, whether it's just a general purpose club or whether it's MCOM, OXCOM, whatever. But that's, to get a good start is the key to that. At least I think it is.
So does the local radio club, I think you mentioned the Smoky Mountain Amateur Radio Club, does it have mentors who are ready to take on new students and kind of lead them to some success?
Well, I hope they do. There are several clubs around here in the East Tennessee area. The Radio Amateur Club in Knoxville, the Smoky Mountain Amateur Radio Club, the Oak Ridge Amateur Radio Club are 3 that come to mind that I'm actually a member of. And typically if and I know at least on the club nets that the Radio Amateur Club in Knoxville has. They have a 6-meter net on Sunday nights. They have a tech net on Monday nights. Those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. And, at that point in time during the net control will say, we're meeting on the third Thursday of every month at Wallace Memorial Baptist Church in North Knoxville, just off Interstate 75. And encourage people to come to the club meetings. And hopefully when they come to the club meetings, somebody's going to be there to greet them. And, hello, my name is so-and-so. Who are you? And give them a chance to participate and, see what it's like. I mean, it's like amateur radio in that sense could be like most any other hobby. I also happen to be a fan of classic cars and I belong to a classic car club. Well, if I show up to a classic car club meeting and nobody even speaks to me, I certainly don't have the encouragement to go back to that meeting because of that. But amateur radio is unique in that our initial contact could be made over the air before we ever meet in person. And because of that, it's important that person get a good reception.
So you say that you're also a classic car collector?
If one counts as a collection, yes.
Oh, and so what do you have for the...
I have a 1964 and a half Ford Mustang. It belonged to Sam Kirby, WB4GBI, who was another one of the gentlemen that I befriended along my amateur radio journey. Sam owned the 146.73 repeater, which was one of the first repeaters on the air in East Tennessee. Sam left us in 2009, and his wife, Debbie, allowed me to take that repeater over. It's now back up where Sam had it on English Mountain, which is a 3,600-foot mountain just to the east of Knoxville. It's quite active. There's a regular group of amateur radio operators that are on there, and it's got a great footprint. It reaches up into southeastern Kentucky, over into North Carolina, a little bit of Virginia, and it's I'm proud of it, and I think Sam would be proud too if he could see it.
And would you put a 3/4 inch hole in the top of a 1964 Mustang?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I have portables, and I'll put them in the seat. But no, I finally met the car after years of telling people over the air that I'd never met a car I couldn't drill a hole in. I finally did.
And is that the classic style of Mustang from that time?
No, this is the classic style. It's a neat little car. It's got a 200 straight six in it, so it doesn't have the big 289 engine in it. But there's some sentimental attachment because obviously it was Sam's and was able to purchase it after he passed. But also just, the connection that he and I had in ham radio. A funny side story was Sam had lost his repeater site and was concerned about the future of his repeater. And we had a phone conversation one day about that about 3 weeks before he left us. And he said, I've got to find a place to put 7.3. Well, at the time, I was the chief engineer for a local FM station that actually had other repeaters on their tower. And I told Sam at the time that we'll take your repeater and we'll put it on this tower and we'll get it on the air from there so that you don't lose it. I said, I'm going to ask one favor for that. And he said, what's that? I said, I want you to help me find a classic car. So that was kind of our little pact that we had made before Sam left us. And I was able, Sam's repeater was actually on an English Mountain from 1973 on. And through a radio station that I actually do broadcast engineering for that built a site on English, I was able to get the repeater back up there where Sam had it originally and in that building and on emergency power. And it's back up serving the ham radio community like it did when it was on the air for Sam.
Are your repeaters linked together? I mean, do you have a wide area system, or are these mostly community repeaters?
These are standalone repeaters. They each have, I would say, their own community on them. There is a linked repeater system in the area, and it is active. Kevin Duplantis, W4KEV, has a linked repeater system with, I think it's 4 or 5 repeaters. Mine, just as a personal choice, are standalones. Each of them, for the most part, has a fairly what I would call regular group that are on there, be it people that are there for MCOM, or be it just for Ragchew, or be it just for fellas that get together in the evening hours and chat over the day's events. Most of my repeaters, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3, are located in higher profile locations, mountaintops, tall towers, and gives them a wider footprint. So they seem to have a community that within that repeater itself seems to thrive on its own without necessarily needing the advantage of linking it to another site or another area.
Are you using auto patch on any of the repeaters these days?
It is off temporarily because I relocated the repeater that it was on to a new site, a higher profile site. But I'm in the process of buying a new controller, and I am specifically buying a controller that will have an auto patch on it. And the reason why I feel like this is important is because Knoxville and East Tennessee border the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Inside the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, there is no cellular service, as there is the case with any of the large national parks. And on more than one occasion, that auto patch repeater has been used by either a local amateur operator here or by someone who is from out of the area who was guided to that frequency by a local ham to say, hey, if you need to make a call for help or health and welfare call or whatever, this frequency has an open auto patch on it. So I am in the process of getting that auto patch back online because I feel like it's very important given the area that we live in.
Can you still get a copper pair, for an auto patch? Or
Yes. The transmitter site that this will actually go to, I have 2 copper pair phone lines up there, ready and waiting.
I hear in multiple places around the world, including the United States, that the phone company is trying to get rid of the copper service.
Well, the large company that starts with the letter A, I remember from my time in broadcast engineering, they supplied a plan they called their Vision 2020, which meant that part of that Vision 2020 was that they wanted to be out of the copper business by then. But they're not. Are a lot of the services, though, that were provided by copper that were specific to the communications industry, like ISDN, T1s, those are becoming rarer. Not that the facilities aren't available, but that the cost to have them have become cost prohibitive. In my broadcast engineering world, we had at one time at the station that I worked for 20 years, we had 6 ISDN circuits. We were able to obtain those for the rate of a business telephone service, which was about $60 a month. By the time we canceled those, the local telco had raised those to over $600 a month. So it made it prohibitive.
You would use ISDN service from the control room to the high school football stadium.
Exactly. In my other life, I'm also the chief engineer for the Vol Radio Network. The Vol Radio Network is the rights holder for Tennessee football, basketball, women's basketball, baseball, and softball games. They hold the rights to those broadcasts. So my task is to make sure that those games make it over the airwaves. For those who are listening by radio or listening by one of the apps that you can stream the ball games with. And this is my 30th year of being involved with the Vol Radio Network. And we use those ISDNs exclusively because it was switchable, it was very high-quality audio, and it was relatively easy to install. But as time has progressed and the local telcos have moved away from it, most all of our broadcasts now are internet-based. We use a special internet codec, such as a Comrex Access or a tie line device, to backhaul those broadcasts back to our flagship station, and then from there to a satellite uplink for the other radio stations that are in the network to pick up the game broadcast.
So you're using LTE or things like or services like this with the Comrex in order to be able to have that same quality of audio that you had before?
We have an LTE modem it's the one that we use as our backup is made by a company called Max Connect. That's a broadcast supplier, and it uses reserved LTE spectrum to accomplish its task. Most all of the venues that I travel to have what I would call decent internet service. The thing about broadcast codecs, as opposed to just your typical internet connection, is it needs to be a real high quality of service. You need to be high up on the QoS food chain, because if you are low on the QoS food chain and there are a lot of other devices that are using that same internet bandwidth that you are, then your broadcast will suffer.
Do you think that the tolerance for poor quality audio is now, the rule here in broadcasting?
Maybe with the consumer, possibly, particularly if they've spent a lot of time listening to compressed audio on their, as a colleague calls it, their iThingy. But for those of us that are on the production side of this, we're still our bar is still set high. The good news about broadcast quality codecs is, given a good internet connection, you'll get a good quality audio with a minimum amount of latency. Latency being the amount of delay involved between the time that you originate the spoken word and the time it arrives at the other end of wherever its destination is. My personal opinion is that while we may have settled, for lack of a better word, for a lesser quality stream, I'm not going to do that out of choice. My choice is always going to be, particularly in the origination end, where I'm originating this broadcast at a football stadium or a basketball arena, I'm going to start with the highest codec bit rate that my IP circuit can stand. because as it leaves the venue where I'm live and goes to the flagship station, there's a compression algorithm. Once it leaves the radio station and goes to the satellite uplink facility, there's another compression algorithm. Once it goes up on the satellite uplink to be relayed back down to the other radio stations, there's another compression algorithm. So my goal is to have the highest that I can on the front end, if you will, so that as it is compressed and recompressed, once it arrives at the radio station to be aired, wherever our affiliate might happen to be, it's not degraded to the point to where it's poor or unusable.
We will return to our guests in just a moment. Nuts and Bolts Magazine is a new sponsor and is an amazing resource for new and old hams alike. Click on the banner to get your online or paper subscription of Nuts and Bolts. A new way to show your support of the QSO Today podcast is to buy me a coffee. I consume gallons of coffee to create this weekly podcast. Invite me for coffee by pushing the yellow button, Buy Me a Coffee, on the QSO Today show notes page. And now back to our QSO Today. Do radio stations still use satellite? It seems to me with all of the fiber in the world and the latency, potential latency from satellites, satellite use for links in the broadcasting world would be passé. Is that
not necessarily so? I dare say that all the syndicated programming that you listen to, the vast majority of it is delivered by satellite. My full-time job now is with WUOT, the University of Tennessee's NPR affiliate. All of our programming, such as All Things Considered, Morning Edition, Weekend Edition, all of that is delivered via satellite. There is an internet fallback should the satellite fail. But the satellite, what latency there is over satellite transmission is pretty much fixed. The latency is the amount of time involved in the uplink to the satellite and then coming back down from the satellite to the individual station. That's pretty much a fixed amount. You know what that's going to be. With internet delivery, depending on the path that your data takes to make it to its destination, and what obstacles it may encounter along the way, that latency is variable. So it's not always a given how that's going to work. About the only thing that can hinder satellite transmissions is something involving the satellite equipment themselves, such as an uplink failure or a downlink failure, or, heaven forbid, I know it has happened, but not often, a satellite failure. Most of those are controllable. Most, if not all, are controllable. And at least for programs that we are airing live, rather than something that is time shifted, I would still say that satellite is the choice, yes.
Did you feel any impact in Tennessee from Hurricane Ian last week?
Overcast skies. Some of the very upper corner of the state of Tennessee received some rain. Up in the Tri-Cities area, Johnson City, Kingsport, Bristol, there was some precipitation there. Mostly over the weekend in the Knoxville area, it was just cloud formations in a direction that we're not used to seeing.
Do you know whether Knoxville hams have been taking emergency traffic from the Florida, the devastated areas in Florida?
I know of one gentleman who I exchanged emails with who did, yes. On our 3980 75-meter Tennessee phone net, our net manager has made it a habit of practicing passing traffic, formal traffic. We also have a group that's just started using WinLink. I have a WinLink node on the air on one of our transmitter sites in downtown Knoxville that's about 1,200 feet up. Gives good access for WinLink users. And this particular ham operator has started what we call a WinLink check-in net, where each week he sends out an email to us to tell us to practice on an ICS form. Or last week, our task was to attach a very low resolution, low file size picture to our WinLink message. With WinLink, I think you can transmit a file up to 120 kilobits. So his directive that week was to send a 5 kilobit photo of the radio that we were using to transmit our WinLink traffic with. And, so every week we have something different that we do to train, to try to familiarize ourselves with this so that when the time comes that we actually do have to use it, we're prepared.
Well, I think that that seems so incredibly wise to exercise using the technology before the event.
Well, our local MCOM group called METERS, Middle East Tennessee Emergency Radio Service, METERS, has a net every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock local time on my 147.075 repeater, in which that's all they do is practice passing digital traffic. This would be an ICS form that's done. I think right now they're using 8 PSK 500, if memory serves me right. Also, once a month, the East Tennessee area hospitals in Knoxville and the surrounding counties participate in a net on the last Friday of the month, where they not only check in, test their equipment as the net control calls the various hospitals within the system. Then after the voice part is done, they'll actually change frequencies from the repeater that they start on. They'll go to another repeater, or they'll go to simplex, or they'll go to 10-meter sideband. But then eventually, when that is done, they'll all meet back on the repeater that they started on, and they'll pass ICS forms via FLDigi back and forth. After the voice part of the traffic is completed, they'll pass messages using FLDigi to each other to make sure that they're capable of transmitting and receiving those WinLink those FLDigi messages.
Now, the people at the hospitals are hams who've been assigned, they're volunteers who've been assigned to the hospital to act as ham radio liaisons to the hospital?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. Each hospital has, I would say, up to 10 available amateurs because not everybody can always make it for a given month. I personally am assigned to the University of Tennessee Medical Center, which is just literally right across the Tennessee River from the university campus where I'm at now. And usually the room is on the roof of the building. Antennas are right outside there. And each one of the hospitals around here, at least in my experience, have been very, very supportive of this. They're actively participating in allowing not only the hams to have access to the facility, but also supporting with their internal facilities folks by facilitating the mounting of the antennas and the ease of getting cables to them.
You need hams when they have a PBX that goes down. If their phone system goes down in a hospital, you need people to be able to relay messages around the building. So it seems very important that hospitals have ham radio operators available to them.
Our local Knox County Emergency Operations Center has an amateur station set up inside of it. They're ready and waiting. Their mobile command post vehicle that they have custom built has several pieces of amateur radio gear in it. As a matter of fact, it's been out to our field day more than once. And I know that some of the surrounding counties also have amateur radio in their EOCs. I can't think of specific counties, but I know for a fact that our home county does. And therefore, I feel like they have recognized that amateur radio is a vital part of their communications, such that if their means fail, that the amateur operators are ready, able to step in, and are also trained as to what to do when they step in.
What do you think the greatest challenge facing amateur radio is now?
Probably like it is with a lot of other, not only hobbies, but aspects of what our lifestyle has been, and that is to involve those younger than us. The white hair kind of gives my age away. And I feel like that for ham radio in particular to survive and to thrive, we've got to continue to interest youth. And it might not necessarily be a piece of radio on a wire on 75 meters. It might be a 2-meter handheld. It might be amateur radio supplying an internet connection, such as Arden. It might be, what am I trying to say? Breadboarding. It might be building things, things involving a Raspberry Pi or Arduino or something like that. I just feel like that's our challenge, is to keep people younger than us involved and keep the lifeblood of amateur radio going. That's where I see our future.
What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
Oh, my goodness. I just think the variety of things that we can do with our license and with our frequency privileges. You know, there's a 2-meter portable here on my desk. There is an HF radio at home. At home, I can run FL Digi. I can run WinLink. Heck, I can even run slow scan television. Or I can go old school like I usually do on weeknights when I'm at home and check into our local CW net using Morse code. The possibilities are I won't say they're endless, but the possibilities are vast with the various things that we can do with our license. There's as you well know, there are aspects within the ham radio hobby of people who like to do just this. There are broadcast engineers that are friends of mine who have taken old RCA or Collins broadcast transmitters and converted them to 160 meters. And you'll find them on 3885, or I forget what the frequency is, on 160 of a night, using those old broadcast transmitters. Then you can go right down the band and you can find somebody running 5 watts in a wire inside a national park with a computer and an interface running FT8 and making contacts on FT8 from their park using Parks on the Air. So there's a wide spread there.
Pretty amazing. Well, before we go, Tim, what's the current rig? What's your current rig? Yeah.
My current rig? For HF, it's a Kenwood TS2000, although I'd love to have a Yaesu FT991A. Maybe I can see one of those in my future. But I still have my Drake TR4C that my father took out a loan for in 1974 to buy me for Christmas. It's right there beside my Kenwood, and it will be on several times this week just because.
I saw in a picture you have lots of Motorola mobiles.
I do. After General Electric sold their two-way radio division by, I won't say by default, but by leanings, I wound up getting involved with Motorola, which at the time when I first got into two-way radio, that was the competition. You know, you just didn't do that. But yeah, I have several pieces of Motorola equipment that are specialty, like 900 megahertz, 6 meters, a Motorola Centaur radio, which is actually probably about 25 or 30 years old. A Motorola Centaur low-band radio will do 10 meters and 6 meters without any modifications. It's a great little, well, it's not little, it's a trunk mount radio, but that's a great radio to have if you're interested in 10 or 6 meter FM. The Motorola 900 megahertz radios, I have a 900 megahertz repeater on the air that's both analog and P25. Also, there's several other repeaters in the area that are 900 megahertz, so that's out there. I still have several pieces of my GE Master 2 equipment on the air as we speak, and have a little stockpile of surplus extra stuff in case something fails that I have to have a parts donor.
We're talking a radio now that's 50 years old. The Master 2?
The Master Pros are 50, yeah. The Master 2 is probably more like 40 maybe, I guess. My 145.47, 146.625, 146.73, 146.85, and 147.15 are all GE Master 2s. 14694 is a Motorola MTR 2000. 14517 is an MTR 2000. 147075 is a Motorola Quantar. So I'm equally I'm equally divided between the two, I guess.
What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
Be open to change. Be open to try something new. Go outside of your comfort zone. If you're just into 2 meters, the technician class now has some HF privileges, which wasn't the case when I was first getting my license. Get on HF. The sunspot cycle is up. My goodness, I worked Japan on 10 meters the other night at 9 o'clock at night in East Tennessee. Get on and try something new. Try something different. Also, I would say, when you hear somebody on the repeater that's sporting a new call sign, in our case in the 4th Call District, a KO4 call, talk to them. Introduce yourself to them. Welcome them to ham radio. Tell them about the local club. Tell them about nets and encourage them to participate, because that's what will keep them around.
Tim, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast.
Well, this is a great honor for me. I want to thank you for the invitation and thank you for the opportunity. I was very honored. Thank you.
73. That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Tim. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in WB4GBI in the search box at the top of the page. Because Tim was pressed for time during our interview, we did not get to his loss of a repeater tower last March, when gale force winds took down the 145-foot Roan 25 tower, supplying repeater services to hams in Blount County, Tennessee. Tim is using a GoFundMe page, link on the show notes page, to repair the radio site, replace the tower with a freestanding tower, and repair the feed lines and antennas lost in the fall. As a repeater owner and operator myself, it is often a thankless job, but it can be expensive. I made a contribution to Tim's project, and I hope that you will too. See the link on this week's show notes page or on Tim's website. My thanks to ICOM America for their continued support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of this fine sponsor by clicking on their link in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, click on the transcribe button at the top of the show notes page. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. By using the Amazon link on the home page before you shop at Amazon allows Amazon to send us a small commission on what you purchase that further keeps our QSO Today project going. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as we work towards episode 500. QSO Today is now available on a large number of podcast players and now a host of podcast services and applications. We are Podcast 2.0 compatible. I now use the Fountain podcast player to listen to all of my favorite podcasts. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.